Hiya, welcome to another request video. This one I'll be popping in the Hawaii Hermes series and playlist as it pertains to Mercury, who I'll be calling Hermes in this video. If you don't know, by the way, Hawaii means something like come on or hurry up. But anyway, the request was to give my take on having a Mercury retrograde in the natal or the birth chart. I've been keen to do this one as I myself have my Mercury retrograde in Virgo in the 3rd house. Before we do sign by sign, let's have a quick gander at what Hermes might be doing when retrograding and what this might mean in natal astrology. Hermes pertains to the mind, intelligence, writing, and all sorts of form and communication, or forms of communication rather. If a retrograded planet, astronomically speaking, appears to be going backwards, then think of Hermes in a retrograded state as also doing a lot of backtracking. Hermes is tripping up over his words. He's going back to the drawing board more often. He's frequently having to linger on the memory of different, bigger setbacks compared to when he's in his direct state. In natal astrology, this suggests someone who from a young age is also majorly set back somehow by the tricks and the trials of Hermes. Hermes may make the younger individual a little less talkative, a little less outgoing, a little more anxious. Anxiety will be a big thing for the young individual, manifesting in different ways depending on the sign and the house where Hermes is located. The individual, especially one who can't find themselves, may struggle with anxiety and other issues well into their adulthood and later life. It's like Hermes really wants to mount the air like the swallows that he can see, but somehow, or something rather, is holding him back. He has to overcome something heavier before he can take flight. Although in this retrograde state, Hermes is by no means inactive. Instead, Hermes goes inward, and his thoughts and ideas, they can become complex. He is able to retain lots and lots of data. He is able to consider almost endless perspectives, though for a long time it will be kept inside, withheld. It may in some cases even be frowned upon if expressed. While in a direct state, Hermes is able to fly just like the swallows, just as fast, maybe even faster. In a retrograded state, he was shot, or he was traumatized, or he was shackled, and it took so long to recover and find a state of freedom. This freedom is hermetic. It's freedom that concerns thought, speech, language, movement, nerves, systems, connections. It's something that makes Hermes itch with excitement to dive into. Yet in this retrograded state, he's made to sit still and endure the temptation to scratch that itch. Due to this state of being made to sit still and this forced endurance, the individual will be acutely familiar with one or two hermetic hiccups, increasing the chances of that individual avoiding these hiccups in future adult life. Generally, it is also interpreted that Hermes in this retrograde state has problems relating to communication, socializing, or adhering to the perceived hermetic norms. Hermes will often make the individual misunderstood. They'll have to repeat themselves, and they may severely struggle to get their point across. Hermes is sort of made to sit down and reflect more in this retrograde state before he can get up off that rock and take flight. So let's start by talking about Hermes in Virgo, the sign in which he's actually said to be exalted. It's often said by astrologers, for example the astrologer Dolo de Pilaman, that exalted planets are at Disneyland. We could also look at this as them being in heaven, where the planetary power can run so high and mighty that it can at times exhaust itself. I have this placement in my 3rd house. Let's then consider the natal astrology of Madonna, who has Hermes 5 degrees retrograde in Virgo in the 12th house, conjunct her Virgo ascendant, which is in turn conjunct her Virgo moon. Hermes is also at the forefront of a stellium of planets in her 12th house. Looking over some of Madonna's interviews over the past years, she has often referenced multiple traumas that definitely reflect her 12th house, which would make, I think, for a whole other video. But right now we're interested solely in Hermes, who also rules friends, by the way. Madonna has talked about losing a lot of her friends, especially to AIDS, stating that this tragic loss of friendship, and I quote, even reminded me that I am vulnerable. Here, Hermes is constantly pulling her back to reflect on the completely unconscious world of the 12th house, the themes over which she has little to no control. The world of victimhood and sacrifice. One of the most famous Madonna songs is arguably the one titled Like a Virgin. Here again we see Hermes leading the way as illustrator of the state of her natal 12th house, which we see especially in the lyric, I quote, I made it through the wilderness. Somehow I made it through. In older interviews especially, I found that Madonna was a deep communicator of realities, especially in that she has often talked openly about sexual fantasies and violence. She even stated on television that kids should be exposed to her music videos so that they too can know these realities and that kids can start conversations with their parents. When Hermes is in the 12th house, you may often find he's cited as being kind of in detriment, that he really doesn't enjoy this house. The 12th house is nebulous, it's out of this realm, it's things that are deeply hidden. Hermes likes to put his hands to things, to crack puzzles. He's an avid wanderer of the mundane realm, conversing with everyone and eavesdropping on as much as he can. But in the 12th house, he's really slowed down. He's in deep, vast water, which is sparkly and mystical enough, but his winged feet are no use. He succumbs to being carried through the house by something greater than himself. In retrograde state, then, you can imagine how much more Hermes feels debilitated. Yet, his role in the natal astrology of Madonna or anyone else with this placement is so vital, or it has the potential to be. If he's able to surrender to the currents and learn more passively, and if he's able to not let huge 12th house lessons disable him, he will be able to come to the surface from time to time. And it is then that he will be able to meet the air again, his natural element, and he will be able to communicate to everyone what he has experienced. It might still come across as hopeless or mysterious or spiritual, but he is able now to put it into words, language, and to pass knowledge on to others who may need to hear what he's saying. Hermes likely is able to retain most, if not all, of the details of his experience, translating them in an excellent and flawless manner. Just look back at the way Madonna pretty much left her interviewers dumbstruck and speechless whenever she would talk about deep 12th house issues that also pertained to Virgoan themes of feminism, humility, service, and criticism. Now let's take a look at the natal astrology of Gwen Stefani, who has Hermes 1 degree retrograde in her 8th house in the cardinal air sign Libra. When Hermes is in Libra generally, it's his element, though he is a little overwhelmed with the responsibility. It's like someone gives Hermes a crown and dominion over people and places, no longer simply flitting here, there, and everywhere of his own free will. Hermes must make big decisions. He must seriously negotiate. He even has to care about his ability to convene groups so as to keep the peace. In the case of Gwen Stefani, one of my fave Libra sons ever, Hermes straddles the border between her 8th and 9th houses. Briefly, the 8th house deals with such themes as death, sexual power, and shared resources. The 9th house, again briefly, deals with such themes as high hope, outgoing convictions, and kind of Phoenician powers. Similar to the 12th house, the 8th house is another one where Hermes isn't so in his element, or rather Hermes is spending a bit too long in the underworld, possibly causing him to overthink and tangle up his this overthinking with negative or fearful feelings. He also wants to get out of the 8th house, which I call the well, and jump right into the 9th house, because the 9th house is where Hermes at least gets to feel bouncy and venturing again, even if things are a bit philosophical and pie in the sky in the ninth house. In this retrograded state, and being on this border, it's kind of like Gwen Stefani or anyone with this placement struggles to focus on dreamy goals, struggles to think optimistically, struggles to feel free for long without the trauma of death and destruction creeping up and trying to plague her mind. When we consider Gwen's early career, there was suicide, big breakups, and also a sense of having to be underground for some time. Nevertheless, Hermes placed in this position can produce powerful, uplifting songwriting. Hermes does rule writing as well, remember. Here, he helps the individual join their songwriting with a mind affected by death, or by ends and circumstances that they could not help or of which they were a victim. With the added Libran air, Hermes is at the end of the day very regal, capable of the necessary emotional detachment in order to communicate mental reflections that are also aesthetic, pertaining to love, and that still seem to remain fair or graceful. Gwen Stefani has been able to be more reflective on relationships and to birth something out of death. Hermes being in Libra has allowed her to not overthink death so as to keep the show going and so as to keep the balance. Now let's take a look at the chart of Hillary Clinton, who has Hermes 21 degrees in her 12th house, also conjuncting her ascendant. I would like to revisit, by the way, these famous people and do more justice to their natal astrology, but right now I don't have a lot of time, so please excuses if this seems brief or not deep enough. But anyway, we already discussed what Hermes might be experiencing in the 12th house when we looked at Madonna. When Hermes is in Scorpio, similar to when he's going through the 8th house, he's again going through perhaps overwhelming emotional over-analysis and skepticism. Hermes retrograded here can make the individual really struggle with emotional excavation, with really thinking about the root causes of their feelings. Hermes can also struggle with helping the individual penetrate the truth. For here in Scorpio, in the 12th house, the truth is kind of locked away in a treasure chest, which Hermes can see, but being submerged in the 12th house waters, he finds it very difficult to get anywhere near it, let alone find the keys to the chest. And even if he has the keys to this chest, it could take yonks for him to get to the chest, being at the mercy of just wherever he's being taken. Although Hillary Clinton is a Scorpio rising, because her 12th house also starts in Scorpio, her life lesson is very similar to a Sagittarius rising. That is, she has much to learn from running away from true feelings. She has much to learn about being too hopeful or naive. Hermes is also conjuncting her ascendant, remember, and so he might not be helping at times because he sort of pulls the otherwise scrutinizing, inquiring, and sharp individual and big personality that is Hillary Clinton into the murky, mysterious depths of the 12th house, ultimately clouding her scorpionic judgment. Her worldview is powerfully hooked onto the truth and reality, yet her mind, or Hermes, seems to frequently want to put this worldview to sleep. If Hermes gets a grip of the keys, unlocks the chest, and resurfaces with its contents, an individual with this placement has unbelievable potential to act and communicate in a ruthless, intensely resourceful, and transformational way. The individual could once and for all destroy all who lied to and betrayed them, and they could start again, fixating on forming new, lasting bonds with real people and real senses. Let's now take a little look at the natal astrology of Gordon Ramsay. And this one seems one of the funniest and quickest to kind of suss out when it comes to Hermes and what Hermes is playing at here. First of all, Hermes is in the 6th house here, where he's in awe of all the information and stimulation on offer at the workplace, and when it comes to putting the cans toward fixing and correcting. Briefly, the 6th house pertains to such themes as everyday routine, work, and maturity. Hermes is also here placed in the fiery, flippant Sagittarius at 2 degrees, leading the way also in a 6th house stellium. And you may note that Gordon's 6th house is pretty big, When it comes to the working life and routines of such an individual with Hermes here, a foul mouth and a hot temper is absolutely on the cards. Hermes retrograde here will have a lot of setbacks and blocks due to his unruly, naughty tongue, yet he kind of knows he'll come off scot-free because Hermes in Sag is very lucky and very canny when it comes to attaining targets and finding a way, any which way. Hermes can definitely excel in Sag energy, but he does suffer being ignored a lot, or being chastised for silly beliefs, or being tethered, and so on. If the individual with Hermes here really puts their mind to following their luck at work and not worrying about what people say about them at work or how people respond to them when they're at work, then they can also come up with some pretty big, far-out tasks to passionately commit to. In Gordon's case, they'll not just make something like being a chef their work, but also they'll go into like run-down and messed up hotels, restaurants. They'll help, revive, and also they'll set up and juggle their own restaurants, and they'll spread hope and opportunity for many in and out of their home country. And this is all regardless of that cheeky mouth, because Hermes in Sag is still blessed and able to work like this. Though, much of what he's saying on TV might continue to get bleeped out. In fact, this retrograded hermetic way of talking becomes actually a very fortunate trademark for him. Let's move on to J.r.r. Tolkien. In this case, he has his Hermes 0 degrees retrograde in Capricorn in the 4th house. So here, Hermes is in what I call sometimes the heart house. Hermes is at home with his writing, his reading, his languages, and being in Cappy energy. Hermes is quite serious about building something, almost like an armchair architect, sort of cozied up with loads of books, preferably books that he's written proudly. But similar to when Hermes was in Libra, in Cappy energy, he is made to feel a bit more responsible than usual. And this particular brand of cardinal energy could make him feel bored, restricted, and that this his wit will only be a hit if it's dry or dark or sarcastic. Hermes is also retrograding here, remember. So he's sort of looking back at the Sagittarius energy that he's just left, being 0 degrees, right? And he's still longing then for fun, for dreaming big, and to let loose like some wild centaur. Placed in this position, Hermes sets his mind on the literal limits of the world he's in, because that makes him feel comfortable. Yet he's often backtracking due to the harshness of that which threatens his roots. It takes Hermes' mind off machines, industry, and imposing constructions, and he seems to withdraw and let his mind wander to magic, or to the magic of a world less encroached upon. In one documentary on Tolkien, actually, it is suggested that Tolkien thought of his country, his actual country, and its literature and folklore to be lacking or even non-existent. Hermes retrograde in Capricorn can make Hermes pessimistic and also make him linger on a particular pessimism, forcing him to withdraw further into the already yin earth energy. Hermes is also made here to keep his mind on important things, yet the mind often wanders to something dreamy or to a storytelling state. Hermes retrograde in Cappy energy also focuses the mind on reputation, especially having to redress or correct misinformation. Hermes may also struggle from mentally wanting to construct something, but finding it to be misinterpreted or to be even undervalued. Next up, we have the natal chart of Steve Jobs, who had Hermes 14 degrees retrograde in Aquarius in the 5th house. Briefly, the 5th house pertains to such themes as fun, personal authenticity, and children. Children including personal projects, by the way. So when Hermes enters the 5th house, he is enchanted by the fire and the drama, though he can find the ego energies a little tiresome. When retrograded, Hermes may be more reflecting about his own creativity. He may have hiccups with personal production. He may even severely struggle with a case of stage fright. This is not really helped when the Aquarian energy enters, causing Hermes to also pay attention to how the party is often pooped for the greater good, for the collective, for some intellectual cause that is anti-audience, yet seems to garner just as much attention. Aquarian air may make Hermes excellent at sticking to creative and revolutionary ideas, if only he can remain focused and not flee once he feels a come down. Hermes may have to revise his originality and his genius when he's here, in an exhausting effort to remain fixed and to creatively follow things through. Stevie Wonder then, who has Hermes 23 degrees retrograde in Taurus in the 8th house. So we looked at Hermes in the 8th house already with Gwen Stefani's chart. But here, Hermes is in Taurus. In this fixed earth energy, Hermes is flying much slower, but also steadier, and relying more on what some would call common sense, as well as thinking and communicating through the basic worldly senses and the spiritual senses as well, all at the same time. Hermes receives lots of messages in Taurus, though he's not necessarily talking about them with everyone or wanting to zip around and spread the word. The 8th house can introduce Hermes to traumatic problems pertaining to the senses, whether basic worldly senses or spiritual, though in Stevie Wonder's case, Hermes also conjuncts his sun in Taurus, suggesting comfort and vitality communicated about and out of the 8th house. Retrograde Hermes placed in Taurus in the 8th house may produce conscious, reflective writing that is dark in nature and or has a subtle note of dread. Yet again, due to his sun being in the 8th, there is a kind of funkiness to it all. His music has also been described as stealth protest music, which to me is a sure reflection of Hermes in the 8th house trining his Mars in the 12th house, but that's for another video perhaps. Let's take a look at Angelina Jolie, who has Hermes retrograde at 22 degrees in Gemini in her 11th house. The 11th house briefly deals with themes such as collectivities, networks, and alliances. And here, Hermes is at home in his element in Gemini, easily allowing for that duality to come out, i.e. Angelina Jolie often being seen as both an actress and an activist. Here in the 11th house, Hermes may be overwhelmed or head over heels with all the excitement of mass communication, eager to bring this house's issues back to the locality, to the mundane levels. One example of Hermes being in action for Angelina is how she's been made not just to reflect on humanitarian issues, but has done so based off her immediate locality. She has spoken about, for example, filming in Cambodia, and while she was filming, she's spoken of her impressions of the immediate Cambodian locality that existed outside of the filming set and outside of her surface purpose for being there, which was to act. Angelina has arguably become a reflective communicator of how multiple types of people are working together to help other people. And like Hermes in the 11th house might act, she has become a reflective mouthpiece for this idea, or you could say a messenger for collectivities. We might also note that Angelina in the past had to reiterate these collective themes in interviews and elsewhere when people wanted to hear, or they just wanted her to talk more about Brad Pitt or some other personal matter. And so this can be a Hermes retrograde in the 11th house dilemma, when you're buzzing and full of energy to talk about big issues, yet others would rather you talked about the mundane or your more individual personal issues. Now let's look at the chart for Princess Diana, who had Hermes retrograde 3 degrees in Cancer in her 7th house. So when Hermes is in Cancer, a cardinal water energy, he is likely forced to take charge of his feelings and to talk about them, to think about them, to stimulate his mind through empathy. This can make Hermes more emotionally intelligent, but it can also make his communication more emotive than logical, even if not in retrograde, causing what he has to say to sometimes be overlooked. In the 7th house, that which pertains to such themes as the other, or committed partners and oppositions, Hermes is also having to engage with animosity. Hermes placed in this position has to restrict his thoughts about his partner. He has problems discussing his partner or even talking to his partner. He has general problems talking about people and things he is opposed to. And he may have problems articulating his feelings regarding comfort and reciprocity with regard to his committed partners. So this position generally might cause difficulties for the individual even to keep their mind focused on a committed partner. Finally, let's consider the chart of Michael Jackson, who had a retrograded Mercury at 25 degrees Leo in his 6th house. We looked at Hermes in the 6th house already with Gordon Ramsay, but in this case, Hermes is in Leo. Hermes in fire energy has no problem throwing himself into shows, especially this is Leonite fire, into shows, singing and dancing, or with talking in extravagant ways. But retrograded and in the 6th house, Hermes' mind for fun is closely connected to the realms of work, routine, and even health. Michael Jackson seems to have often been asked to explain his inner child. Leo energy being associated with one's inner child. But also he was asked whether this was appropriate in adulthood. Read whether this was mature. His mind may also have been stuck on this mixture of performance and work from a young age. And his mental stimulation may have even been hindered by his childhood studio routine. He seems also to have had repeated discussions of and just had to revisit the theme of his health, notably the sun's threat to his skin, the sun being the ruler of Leo. As with many retrograde placements for Hermes, this may have caused Michael anxiety and caused him to overthink this particular health matter. Alrighty, that will be all then for this brief Hermes through the signs in retrograde video. I hope you enjoyed and found it insightful. I hope I've also shown how a retrograded Hermes or any planetary archetype retrograded does not mean at all failure or stress when it comes to mercurial power. See, this is my Mercury retrograde coming out. It may simply mean that the individual has to pay more attention to where their mind is often forced to revisit, or what themes the individual is often having to talk about, or what ideas and mental states might hinder their communications, or mean that they get misunderstood. Hermes simply has to remain seated a little longer, but once he gets up, he may just help the individual become unstoppable. Alrighty, love you, and see you next time.